Why can't people stop systemic and institutional racism? Why can't they stop it? It's become abstract. It exists, but if you can't see it, you can't stop it. This is why so many people believe racism doesn't exist. In many forms, it's blatant and overt, but in many other forms, it's abstract and it's coded and embedded. So abstract racism is one of the things that keeps it going institutionally and systemically. I'm going to play a clip for you in a moment that shows or illustrates my point. But first, I want to give a definition of abstract. And this is just, to be honest, Google's definition. And the definition says, abstract, an adjective meaning existing in thought or as an idea, but not having a physical or concrete existence. It exists in thought. Think about this now with systemic and institutional racism. It exists in thought as an idea, but not having a physical or concrete existence. So there are ways that it's being done, but it's difficult to prove unless, like with anything abstract, you have to take a step back to be able to see the full picture. Let me illustrate with my clip.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, it backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
Race is coming on the back burner, but it exists in the abstract. Pretty clever. That was Lee Atwater, a political strategist, consultant and advisor for the Republican Party, and in particular for Ronald Reagan and George Bush, maybe a few others. But the idea is abstract racism remains. You're listening to Let's Chew the Gum. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Let's Chew the Gum. I'm your host, Protocol. We talk a lot about a lot of things in this show while we chew the gum, and just like every show, we always have
something for your mind. Something for your mind. Something for your mind.
무엇인가 정신에 집어넣으세요. 어떤 것 필요합니까?
Something for your
정신에 집어넣으세요.
mind.
정신에 집어넣으세요.
Something for your
abstract racism. You heard it. This is key to for us to be able to understand how systemic and institutional racism continue to flourish, and it happens because it remains in the abstract. And that's been a strategy for quite a few individuals who've realized that, overt racism is going to hurt them economically, it's going to hurt them politically, and that most people, for the most part, aren't going to go for it, right? Unconstitutional, illegal. But how do they find ways around it? Again, put it in the abstract, right? As you heard Lee Atwater say, forced busing. That's a code word. Today, it's coded in different languages, whether it's how you discuss cutting taxes or the type of tax policies you're going to implement. He understands that would hurt black people more than most. I'm not saying that he said it, but I understand it, right? And it reminds me of the latest round of, I'd say since 2013, the latest round of coded language, and that is voter ID. Voter ID. You saw after the Shelby County court case, Shelby versus Holder, 2013, where the Supreme Court ruled that certain articles, particularly Article 5, I believe, of the Civil Rights Act, was going to be removed. Well, that was put into place because there were several states that were denying the rights of African Americans to vote, sometimes abstractly, right? Whether it was threats or whatever type of policies they wanted to utilize. In the past, it had been poll taxes, grandfather clauses, or literacy tests. So this Civil Rights Act was put into place. Voting Rights Act, I apologize. Well, with this court case, some states pleaded that they weren't racist anymore, for lack of a better phrase. They weren't engaged in those type of policies. And so this restriction on whether the idea is they would have to declare or report out to federal jurisdictions whenever they were going to change a policy that affected the Voting Rights Act, whenever there was a sense that the participation or input of a certain percentage of groups of people based upon race were not evident in the voting statistics. So if there were things that were going on that caused, let's say, black people to not show up so much in the polls as far as participants, that would need to be looked at. For example, why? We've seen this type of thing in the 2000 election in Florida, when you had state troopers on the road, or rumors that they were going to be arresting people at the polls. And we're seeing it again, voter suppression. So this idea of voter ID, we're going to talk about, how it's a good idea. Sounds great, right? But what does it mean in the abstract? How does that institutional systemic racism? So if you haven't been watching the news over the past, 8 years, you've seen a rush of legislation in various states, particularly states with Republican majority legislative branches that are pushing voter IDs, meaning you have to have a ID to vote. And that sounds great. You should have to identify who you are. We want to protect our institutions. We want to protect our voting process. So what's the problem with that? It's a tax. Requiring a voter identification is a tax. We got rid of poll taxes. That's illegal. You can't charge people to vote. It's the same thing now. So the other thing is, it disproportionately, look at the statistics. I'm not a person that's going to spout statistics all the time. I could. But I want you to look it up for yourself so you can believe. That disproportionately hurts certain groups of people. Black people, poor people, right? And it gives an advantage to those that are more affluent, more wealthy people. For example, if a voter ID, if an identification costs, let's say $30, $40, 30, 40 bucks, and you are a family of 5 or 6, multiply that 30 by 5 or 6, right? You're looking at $150, $180 for a family structure. Let's not bring in the topic of traditional versus non-traditional families, right? Non-traditional families, you may have multiple generations in one household, and they all may need to vote and have that requirement, right? They all need that identification. That's a lot of money. So when you look at a situation like that, that adversely hurts a particular group, they won't be able to participate in the process. If I have to choose between, are we paying rent this month, or are we buying groceries this month, or are we getting ID so everyone can vote and make some lasting changes? It's hard to say, I'm not going to pay the rent, or we're not going to eat, right? To the contrary, a more affluent or wealthy family, that $200 may be nothing, drop in the bucket, not a big deal. So in these states where this is happening, when I hear voter ID, it's akin to the N word. I don't want to say it and propagate it here. Lee Atwater said it. It's akin to the same thing, right? It's abstract. It's an abstract, right? It's an idea that exists, but there's nothing concrete that you can say that would be a racial identifier. But we can see beyond the abstract. So is, voter IDs necessary? Maybe. If we're going to do it, it should be something that the government is providing to everyone, not something that individual citizens have to pay a tax for. You're taxing people to vote is a tax, right? And again, I'll say it again just so it can sink in. If you're taxing people to vote, that is an inequitable situation that directly hurts your poorer populations. So with all the talk of voter reform, this is one way that you can exclude. You hear them talking about purging the voter files, right? Purging voters from the list of eligible voters. That's a serious way to do it. It's an easy way to do it, and it doesn't, as Lee Atwater said, it doesn't connote race. Race is on the back burner of that. So he was saying that his whole statement was about how could they continue to get the votes of racist individuals without seeming racist themselves. And that's one way to do it. On the contrary, there's a bill, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, or Voting Rights Bill. Forgive me if that's not the correct, exact term or name for the bill. But the idea here, it was to restore the strength of the original Voting Rights Act so these type of situations couldn't happen. It was only after the Supreme Court, by a narrow margin of 5-4, struck down or reversed that portion of the Voting Rights Act, that these states rushed to institute these voter ID bills, because they knew beforehand that trying to do that would trigger this law, right? So if they can purge voters from the process, and they can elect the individuals that they want, because now they'll have majorities, right? They can pass policies that they want to have passed that will have lasting harmful effects for quite a few people, then it's all good for them. Their contention is we don't need those Article 5 of the Voting Rights Act, right? We don't need that particular article, because Article 2 simply states that it's illegal to discriminate in the voting process based upon an individual's racial group, right? And so it's illegal. However, that portion of it would be more reactive. So that's their defense. It's already Article 2 already states that states can't do this. So there's the protection. But again, that's reactive. That means you may do something already. You'll institute policies, get certain people elected into office, and they run roughshod over the political arena within those states. Again, passing laws and policies to the detriment of folks. And now we look and say, well, you did something wrong in Article 2, and then there's this whole process through the courts and lots of money and time. And in the meantime, people have suffered while other people have prospered illegitimately. The article that was struck down from that would have prevented those things from happening in the first place. Right? And if individuals had no malintent, why would they be concerned with weakening that bill? That bill provided equity and oversight for everyone. If you aren't doing anything wrong, you had nothing to worry about. You didn't need to fight so hard to remove that restriction, to remove a restriction that made sure that if anything were changed, right, boundaries, gerrymandering, any type of activities that were changed, whether they want to close polling places. And look at our last election. You saw in some cities where there were lines 7 and 8 hours long. You had a new representative from South Carolina, I believe, that spoke about it on the House floor, or the Senate floor, I'm sorry, senator, and many others. But look at the situation. So many attempts to disenfranchise voters, closing polling places, eliminating Sunday voting, eliminating early voting. There's no reason someone needs to be in line voting in particular areas for 7 and 8 hours. That's by design, meant to discourage folks. So this Voting Rights Act would reinstitute those requirements. Again, if nothing was wrong with your process, you wouldn't need to fear having that oversight. And I've heard the argument that opponents would say, well, it infringes on state sovereignty in terms of states being allowed, according to the Constitution, to conduct elections in the way that they wish. But let's understand that the Constitution is the law of the land. And within your state, if you're implementing laws and policies that contradict or violate the Constitution, then it is the job of the federal government to step in. This is a federalist system. We have shared power. So because you're a state, you should have complete sovereignty over the election process. And if you're violating the rights of individuals within your state, that's okay. And the federal government shouldn't be able to do anything about it. Okay. I see how you are. I see what you're trying to do. So this bill that's still currently in committee needs to have some force put behind it by individuals to suggest to those that are on those committees to get it out of committee so that it can be debated and voted on the floor. Abstract racism is real. Abstract racism is real. Let's take a break. We'll come back in a moment. You're listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. I'm your host, Protocol. Feel free to email us at letschewthegum@gmail.com for show topic suggestions, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show. We always appreciate our listeners' input. We'll be right back.
Mind, something for your mind, mind,
Lace mind.
something for your mind.
무엇인가 정신에 집어넣으세요.
You haven't heard about Anchor. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast also, with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So, what are you waiting for? Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
From the town to the nation, we'd like to do a song for you about the larger picture. There's only one season lately. There used to be an agreement between the seasons that they would all come and stay for 3 months and then go to wherever seasons go when they're not where we are. Lately there has been no spring, no summer, and no fall. Politically and philosophically and psychologically, there has only been the season of ice. It is a season of frozen dreams and frozen nightmares, a scene of frozen progress and frozen ideas, frozen aspirations and inspirations. They call the season winter. We call the song Winter in America.
That was the great poet Gil Scott-Heron. Thank you for listening to our sponsors as well. We're back. This is Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z. And today's topic has been or is about abstract racism. We heard a clip earlier from Lee Atwater talking about racism in the abstract as a way to secure the votes of racist people without sounding racist themselves. So his way of gaming the system. Specifically, we went into a brief discussion, obviously, about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which is designed to strengthen the ability of the federal government to intervene whenever states or entities within states make moves that are detrimental and threaten the ability for all citizens to have equitable access to voting. We're looking at this, one of the latest abstract racist terms, voter ID. Again, sounds great in the abstract, and I'd be all for voter IDs if there's an equitable process by which all eligible voters could receive them and then act upon it. It should not be a tax that negatively affects poor people. And don't get me wrong, people, although black people are among the highest to be disproportionately affected by this, it affects quite a few people if you're poor in general. So this is not only an issue that has clause in the racist element, but also social class issues. Listen to some of the episodes of Let's Chew the Gum from earlier in this season where we talked about where the term white even comes from and how it was an issue that broke up a formidable alliance amongst all races in our country. And that was a class issue. So if you're poor, this will affect you as well. And those that are designing these, they have no worries about that. They aren't poor like you. They may look like you, but they aren't you. You aren't them. So look out for your fellow man, woman, future generations. When you hear these things, don't fall for the rhetoric. Don't get caught up in the fact of individuals that look like you that seem to be doing work on your behalf, but they're doing work to their benefit. Really look at how it will affect you and your particular families. Look at how it will affect you and your particular families, and then make your decision. But this coded abstract racism, we need to put on a set of lenses so we can clearly see through it. Voter IDs, it's great. They should be provided. If that's the case, go back and look at the amount of bills that have been introduced after the 2013 Shelby County versus Holder court case. Look at how many bills were introduced that were designed to eliminate voters. That couldn't happen before, because just as they are unethical now, they were unethical. Sorry, just as they were unethical then, they are just as unethical now. And now they're making these unethical ideals into law. That'll be hard to overturn in many cases, costly to attempt to overturn. So again, if you feel like that is a benefit to you, if you feel like it's okay to eliminate certain groups from voting, then maybe you are part of the problem also. But again, they'll come for you. I want to share a quote with you before we end this session. This quote is from Martin Niemöller, and it comes from the time frame of World War II. I'm not going to go into a history of who he was. He was a pastor, but he was involved at various levels during the time of the Nazi invasion of Europe. And he stood by and for a time was maybe an active, well, let me just give you the quote. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. When they come for others and you see others in plight and you don't speak up, who's going to be left when they come for you to speak for you? So if you don't think that this is important on that level, I don't want to say wait and see. I hope that you are inspired to do something about it. I hope that you are engaged in the process to learn more about what it is you don't know, and to be able to see through these abstracts, this coded racism. When something is abstract, step back, take a look, step back more until you can get a clear picture. And I hope that you'll be able to see. This is Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z. I hope that this was enlightening for you. I hope that you'll continue to come back for more information. And again, please email us at letschewthegum@gmail.com for questions, to leave comments. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, we invite you to do so. Until next time, remember, we always have
Something for your